If you want to kick up your next wine event quite a few notches, you have to consider a vertical tasting, and not just any vertical tasting, but one with expert food pairings. Tonight on SIP, we have an amazing Cabernet Sauvignon producer out of Napa Valley and a private chef discussing how to make the most impressive vertical tastings come to life. SIP episode 147 begins now. My name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar, a direct-to-consumer wine company specializing exclusively in the best limited production wines coming out of Napa and Sonoma right now. We have a wonderful evening coming up because this next Thursday really kicks off the feeding season, or some people call it the holiday season. It is that time of year where we break out all the stops as hosts and entertainers, and we want to make certain. Jan has a question already. We haven't even gotten past the infomercial yet, Jan. I will come to you in a moment, but I do want to let folks know we've got two guests this evening, and I also want to let you know that the quiz this past week was question: aged wine shows tertiary. That was a key phrase: tertiary aromas and flavors. Examples include, and the answer was D: earth, mineral, leather, and tobacco. Now, the answer was D for the quiz question. Jim B went from not even on the leaderboard last week, couldn't even get an answer in, to number one this week. So it is a little bit like the Southwest Airlines commercial. When that email blast comes on, everything in Jim's house buzzes, dings, and he runs and answers the question. This time he paid dividends. I mentioned Brent R. Brent actually sent a picture justifying his answer from a WSET manual that said it is basically C and D. So we're going to give Brent credit as well. Didn't have to send in a picture, but definitely going to be some credit there. So tonight we are talking about food and wine tasting, specifically as it relates to a vertical. And I do want to talk a little bit about verticals because this is when things get kicked up a few notches. A vertical tasting is just an absolute ton of fun. Now, one of our guests this evening has been gracious enough to actually make verticals available from an assortment of his wines. There is probably very few people that are kinder and sharing their wine, but I also want to let you know that we have a vertical on the site right now. The Angelo Cellars, 100% this fruit is all from Stagecoach Vineyards, has 6 bottles from a vertical standpoint. There is one left. One of these verticals is left. So if you are interested in doing a vertical tasting after tonight's episode, you're going to be packed with knowledge. This would be a vertical to grab and do it with. So vertical tastings are all the rage, and you need to understand how to do them. You need to understand what food to have with them. So tonight we have 2 special guests. George Noble and Chef Spencer are with us this evening, and I invite you both to join the audience and the crowd. Chef Spencer is here. George is going to be here in a second. There he is, because George got late to the game because he had internet problems. The gang is all here. Now, fun fact, I was going to say, Chef and George know each other because of this event from behind. So please say hello.
Hi, Chef Spencer. How are you doing?
Hi, George. Nice to see you again. Hi, everyone. Happy weekend.
Jeff and Jane are here that were at the event. I know Scotland and Lily will not be here, unfortunately, because they are going to a murder mystery dinner. And little do they know, it's Professor Plum in the library with the candlestick. So, all right. So, George, I want to begin with you because longtime Noble or longtime Cellar Angels fans are familiar with your name, your wines. But there's a couple of new people on that I see, several, as a matter of fact, and they may not know the name or the bottle of the brand. So give us a little bit of brief history on where you made wine, why you chose the area you did, and kind of a little bit of the philosophy behind your aging technique.
Well, I guess I started making wine commercially in 2003, but that was a Valley 4 product with a different wine company. And then I moved to a very nice estate up on a hill. And so my neighbors had some great hillside fruit. So I started integrating hillside fruit into my wines literally from 2004 on. And about the time I was ready to roll out my wines in 2008, the economy kind of went south, if everybody remembers. But having the fruit in my wines and from the hillsides and the tannins and the balance, my wines just kept getting better in storage. So, and personally, I like older wines. So I decided to wait, and I didn't release my wines till 2012. So I literally sat on fours through, continued to make wines. So when I first rolled it out, I decided to roll out my 2004, 5, 6, and 7 together. So I started doing verticals at Meadowwood in 2012. And I've pretty much been doing around the Napa Valley. I've been doing verticals for over 10 years now.
So that's interesting, because that's actually a part of the story that I've not heard. Your decision to age the wine was basically a byproduct of the global economic crash of 08 and 09.
Correct.
And
because everybody would said, you know, I don't want a new wine unless it's $35. And to do it when you're a limited producer and buying hillside fruit, it's a quick way to go out of business.
Well, and I'm going to talk a little bit about hillside fruit in a second, because that actually would lead into something that Chef Spencer would want to know a little bit more about too, as it relates to how hillside fruit manifests itself in the wine. But I do want to introduce Chef Spencer, because while the wine is always very important, how we pair whatever we pair with the wine also makes a tremendous difference. And Chef is one of the type of people where 1 + 1 = 5, because he's that good with the culinary skills.
I'm going to have a drink to that.
Please. So Chef, say hello and introduce yourself a little bit, and let the folks know kind of your culinary journey and wine journey.
Well, hi, everyone. My name is Spencer Hochman. I'm a private chef. I'm based in Sonoma County in Sebastopol in the Russian River appellation. I moved to California 7 years ago from New York, where I grew up. I grew up in the lower Hudson Valley. It's about 25 miles north of New York City. And I grew up in a family that loved to eat. You know, my father was a famous eater in his circles, and I followed suit. And so food is such an important part of all of my family's traditions, holidays, gatherings. You know, I know this is a cliche almost, but we're the type of family that discusses dinner at lunch. So that was kind of my baseline of what we were working with. My grandmother was a wonderful cook. Learning about her recipes from my mother is illuminating and fascinating, and you know, spurred me on to become a chef. After college, I have a degree from the University of Maryland, and I can recall the first year of college putting on that freshman 15. Eating, you know, the reins were off. I could eat whatever I want. No one was telling me what to do. And then the second year of college, when I moved out of a more dorm situation, I learned how to cook. And I can remember my first real memories of being fascinated by cooking was watching the Food Network as like a 10 or 11-year-old. I recall being fascinated by Molto Mario. It was the first time I'd seen anybody talk in Italian and English and have a knowledge and expertise of what he was making and describing that to the people who he was feeding. And I grabbed onto that. And, you know, we don't like to talk about Mario Batali much anymore, but his inspiration to me in that regard still sticks with me. And after college, I was 23 years old, so I got a little bit late to the game, but I just started cooking in restaurants. I started working. I was a 23-year-old dishwasher, and I just dove in. And you know, I worked in small restaurants in the lower Hudson Valley. I worked in Philadelphia. I got my first opportunity to work on a hotline in an Italian restaurant in Philadelphia, and that's really where I learned how to love pasta and chicken under a brick, pollo al matone. and these amazing dishes that you just let ingredients sing. And then with the, oh, go ahead, Martin. Sorry.
It's interesting in that there's a couple things that are very parallel to my upbringing, in that I am quite familiar with the Freshman 15. Remember that fondly. And I did not get exposed to the Food Network channel the way you did. I think my first exposure to culinary was Julia Child on Channel 11 or WPBS, and in the Chicago market. And then any Dan Aykroyd Saturday Night Live skit imitating Julia Child, which kind of scared me away from the kitchen aspect. But there is one thing that I don't know if you knew this, George, your exposure from a culinary standpoint, if memory serves, your father was a chef.
My father was a chef, and so I have some line time also. And I literally worked in the restaurant when I was going through a high school for a little extra cash. And unfortunately, we didn't have quite the family experience because our restaurant seemed like it was open every day, all the time. And so we did our family dining right in the restaurant. You know, it was just, we were there working, and when you get a few minutes, you get something to eat. But I remember on my way to high school, I'd kind of stop by and do a steak and eggs kind of thing, and the hash browns. So it was a pretty good life.
I was going to say, not a bad high school lunch right there.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a breakfast. I came back for lunch.
And Chef, out of curiosity, do you have any siblings?
I have an older sister. She's 7 years older.
Okay. So you kind of got, is she in the culinary? Is she?
She likes food, but she's not as adventurous of an eater, but she loves to bake. You know, but feeding my family was always, you know, different. You got to juggle a couple different things to make sure everybody's happy. But yeah, so.
Well, good. And it's funny because now families are starting to get together. Thankfully, the pandemic is mostly over and people are starting to gather. And it's always something to gather around a holiday table. However, as I mentioned in kind of the intro, you can kick it up a notch when you do a vertical tasting. And I have never been to one that's not been special. I mean, the minute you see vertical tasting on a menu, or the minute you see when you walk into a private wine event and it's a vertical tasting, you can actually just feel the excitement in the air. I want, George, you to kind of provide your philosophy, because you've hosted over 100 vertical tastings of your wines in the Valley, mostly at Meadowood and various restaurants. What has your philosophy been when you are making the determination on which wines you're going to bring for vertical tasting?
I guess it depends if it's somebody new to my wines or somebody I've had the pleasure of doing a first or second or a third tasting with.
Let's say they're new.
They're new. I would probably skip about 2 years between my vintages. I might do a 4, a 7, a 10, a 13, just so they get a kind of a wide variety of my wines. And there's approximately, if I did the numbers right, 3 years apart. So they get to see how the wines age. Because through that time period, I had Dave Lattin as my winemaker. So the wines were made approximately the same philosophy and the same barrel mix. And so we tried to, when we found what seemed to be a good formula for us, we tried to make the best wine we could per vintage. So there's probably more vintage variations with my wines than there is with some people. With some people,
Sure,
want their wines to taste the same, where I wanted my wines to be the best they could for that vintage. So you get to see the difference of the wines, because the weather's not the same. The irrigation's not the same. You might trim your vineyard a little different, so the sun exposure is not the same. So it was a new learning experience every year. I want to say challenge, because that was the fun part of making wine. I mean, it was to try to figure out how to work with weather and do the best you could, for a nice finished product.
And that's actually, and we'll get to the food portion, because you can do a vertical tasting without food. It's not, I mean, I wouldn't advise it. You'll
No.
quickly be in a horizontal tasting position.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't go more than what George just described as 3 years between vintages. The goal, or one of the goals of a vertical tasting, is to get that vineyard or that vintage variation. So there's too many attributes that can be at play when you start going many more years between the vintages that you're tasting. I mean, George mentioned just 4 or 5 of them with regards to different sun exposure, different irrigation, different rootstock could have been moved in, different pruning techniques, all of that stuff could be in there, different barrel regimen. So 3 years would be my suggestion as the maximum between vintages. And is there a quantity of vintages that you think is a good sweet spot to taste, George?
I used to do 4. I've cut it back to 3 just because we were having too much fun and I had to drive home. It's almost, you almost expose your people to too much at one time.
Right.
And so it's too many choices, and so at 3 or max I would go would be 4, and I think the minimum is 3.
Okay.
That's kind of my sweet spot. Like I say, I've been doing 3 lately.
And then Chef George is a Cabernet whiz. So his wines and his varietal of choice is Cabernet Sauvignon. And when you're doing tastings and food pairings with that, what are some of the things that you need to know as an expert with regards to pairing something with Cabernet Sauvignon? Obviously, you want to know the vintage, but what are some of the things that you're looking for, or do you want to know ahead of time so you know how to kind of plan the menu?
I mean, you obviously want to know about the baseline characteristics of the wine and how they're going to play with food. But I think for a vertical tasting, in terms of how I would approach it from a menu standpoint, would be you treat it like a tasting menu. You treat the dishes like, if for me, a salad is a great way to work with some versatility on how you want to pair with a wine. You can do different types of lettuces in terms of a lighter lettuce or a heavier lettuce or a bitter lettuce. You can put different cheeses on those lettuces. You can have fun with the salad dressings to kind of mimic the flavors that would complement the tasting notes of the wine.
Okay, you're already at a pay scale way above my head. Do you just name there's 3 types of lettuce? Are you kidding me?
When I'm designing a menu, I'm trying to
I like it,
but versatility.
So let's say you have a younger wine. Let's just say it's the 2018 Cabernet Sauvignon. And younger, it's still 5 years old, and yeah, it's young in Noble standards. It's not even released yet. But so give me a light, medium, and heavy salad by the name.
A lighter salad would be a mâche or a lamb's lettuce, or even like microgreens, lots of different microgreens. But you wouldn't want to have anything necessarily too bitter. Medium would probably be an arugula. You can start to add some more bitter and texture into that. And then the heavier lettuce that I love to play with are your chicories, radicchios.
Hanging out with you, Chef. It's just not even funny how much more I'm going to hang out with you.
Those heavier Italian lettuces that really pack a punch almost on their own.
Right.
And just a little light dressing on that will make a lettuce like that sing, and then that can almost open it up to let the wine sing. Because you don't have to do too much to that lettuce.
So no, and that would be kind of fun, George, to do this. You just mentioned 3 different weights of lettuce, Chef, and then you could actually as you mentioned earlier, which I think is an awesome idea, treat the lettuce as kind of the part of the tasting menu itself, because you could have 3 little serving spoons of different lettuces and then have each one of those with, say, the 2018 to see what the weight is on the wine and with the lettuce. And, ooh, this one is really bitter, or this one accentuates the fruit. Now, what type of dressing would you use in that so as not to overpower anything?
I am a bit of a vinegar nut. Balsamic vinegar is my favorite thing. That can be overpowering, depending on the quality of it. But
Right.
you know, you can play with it. You know, you have your sherry vinegars and your red wine vinegars. I think the main thing you want to focus on is the quality of that vinegar. So you're eliminating the that cloying moment that you get when
Yep.
you have a vinaigrette. And you also don't want to have olive oil necessarily involved in the vinegar. You want a neutral oil, like a grapeseed, something that will allow the vinegar itself to kind of shine through and to play with the wine as well and the ingredients.
I like that. I mean, that sounds splendid and exquisite. And something George mentioned earlier kind of ties into what you just talked about with regards to you want to know the baseline of the wines. And George talked about valley floor fruit and then hillside fruit. So George, if you would, for the audience, give us a couple flavor descriptors on some generalization on Napa Valley floor Cabernet and then Napa Valley hillside fruit.
Okay, these are rash generalizations because I think Napa Valley has 23 or 25 microclimates. So you can just go off in a whole nother world when you start talking about different microclimates. But I think the valley floor fruit has generally less tannins and probably more fruit. It's not as complex. It's kind of where all the deep soil is, so you almost got to be careful it doesn't get too much water. Where the hillsides, you have very little dirt, so to speak. The roots are struggling. Water runs down the hill. In our vineyard, we would water heavier in the top, knowing it's all going to run downhill. So the very top, we had like the sprinklers were set closer together than they were at the bottom, knowing the dirt got deeper, lower on the hillside. More tannins in the hillside fruit. Generally speaking, a little more complex. I think that's the quick version.
I like it. And it's interesting because especially, and folks that have been to Napa Valley and anybody that's been on any of the previous 146 episodes, when we do Google Earth, don't get excited, Jeff. We actually show you the valley floor and show you kind of where Napa Valley is. It's aptly named. I mean, it is a valley between 2 ranges. And as George mentioned, the valley floor is the most fertile because you've got 1 million years of erosion and it is deep and it's very easy to get some nutrient there. It's not as easy on the hillside and up on the mountaintops to get that hillside or get that water and nutrient. And those vines have got to go down 20 or 30 feet. And inherent in that struggle, that impacts the berry size, that impacts the berry concentration, the tannins, and all of it. But Chef, getting back to that baseline, now knowing that, you know, the tannin is different, do you ever get kind of freaked out when you've prepared a menu and you don't know the wines in advance, and then you realize, oh boy, this is going to be tough?
I don't know if freaked out's the right word. Because we're operating, you know, we're in the red zone. We're about to kick a touchdown anyway because we've got good food and we've got good wine. So
Right.
chances are we're gonna hit on something.
Unless you're the Bears, but that's fine.
I've been lucky enough where, you know, I have an idea of what the wine is. So, you know, I mean, unless I'm going completely off script and taking a massive risk and doing some type of a wild pairing and taking a risk like that, I think I know what I'm going to get in terms of pairing certain foods with certain types of wine. So, you know, if the client, for me, since I'm a private chef, is very discerning, then we would have to have a conversation beforehand. But the reality of it is, you living out here, I have a good idea of what I'm working with in terms of what I'm trying to pair with. Whether it's a Sonoma Coast Pinot or a Russian River Pinot or a Napa Cab. I mean, yeah, I have a pretty good idea. So
Okay.
it hasn't happened.
Good. Yeah, I would hate to have, walk into the house and the host says, okay, we're going to be doing sherries from 1940 through 1944. That's our vertical tasting.
We're all having dessert for 4 courses.
Exactly. Is there anything, chef, that the armchair chef online this evening, or pit master, if you will, the barbecue master, any rules of at all costs avoid this pairing, or this food is a wine killer to a degree? It used to be, in my opinion, asparagus. Asparagus was always tough to pair with wine unless you grilled the heck out of it and toned it down a bit and got some char. But what is your opinion on maybe stay away from this?
It's funny because I was going back on the menu that I made for y'all last summer. And I was thinking about the salmon with the tomato salsa and wondering, how we paired. Tomatoes are very difficult. They're very acidic. They're very meaty. They overpower the dish. Essentially, most dishes that you have are a tomato dish, unless you're cooking it with a sauce. The tomato is the star, and I've had a little bit more trouble pairing tomatoes with things. I usually just fall back on something sparkling for that. Something light and easy, and that allows the tomato to be the tomato, and you could still have a drink with it.
There are worse things to fall back on than sparkling.
But there's so much wine out there, and there's so many good producers that a hands-off approach. Almost like if you find 2 things that you really love, I think there's a way to make those work. I don't know. I don't like to have many rules. So
I don't blame you. All right. You mentioned the dinner that you prepared for us last year, and I do want to show some pictures from that because we have some folks that attended that. So here is the just the starter wines that George brought for the group, and the houses, and this is chef actually really getting it done in advance. And many of you angels and sipsters, you go to Napa or Sonoma with 3 or 4 couples, I highly recommend, if you're going to go tasting during the day, have chef come over in the afternoon or evening and make dinner. It is outstanding. It is something that you're going to be behold. So here is the menu. And the oopsie, there's a spreadsheet. Hang on a second.
I did notice I broke my 4 vineyard rule, my 4 vintages rule with you, Martin.
You did. That happens to a lot of people. I have no idea where that went. Yeah, to our benefit, I will say that this is the house that was rented, and Mission Control will actually put that in the chat if anybody wants to go ahead and rent that. It's up off of north of Calistoga, and it comfortably, I think we had 5-bedroom home. But I do want to bring up, talks amongst
technically
yourself.
I believe it's in Knights Valley. If you want to talk appellations, I believe it's the Knights Valley region of Napa that straddles between Napa and Sonoma.
Perfect. And we had Knights Valley on last week, or Knightsbridge from Knights Valley on. So let me go grab that. And I do want to talk to you, Spencer, about we talked about lettuces with younger wines and different weight lettuces. So then what do you think of, and as you know, George's wines, and now we're going to get to a little bit of age. So let's say we started with a 2018. We're going to go now to maybe a 16 and George's blockbuster 15. Then what do you go to for a little bit more heavier appetizer beyond salad?
I really enjoyed the slider that I made for the group. I had just come back from a trip in Italy, and I had one of the more amazing hamburgers of my entire life in Modena. And it had salsa verde and balsamic mayonnaise and a Parmesan crisp and a big meaty burger. And those flavors sung together and complement a cab of that age. It's just a nice, rich dish that goes well with a bigger wine.
And why?
It's you're almost covering your palate with meat and fat, and you need something that's going to be strong enough to cut through that.
Perfect. You said the magic word that I was looking for with regards to fat. So how does fat manifest itself from a flavor sensation, weight on the tongue, and then what helps accentuate or mitigate that from a wine standpoint?
Well, I mean, fat is a great vehicle for flavor. It grabs onto whatever you're cooking with it, as long as you don't burn the fats, and then you get this big acrid taste, obviously. But what type of butter are you using? If it's a quality butter and you saute beef in there, then you almost have the beef fat coming and playing with that butter, and they grab onto each other, and there's an alchemy that happens that's just, those are the smells and the tastes that really make food memories. I think. Oh, that was very nice.
So here's a tray that has some fat on it.
Yep.
I still remember the blue cheese.
Yes, that Point Reyes Bay Bleu, a beautiful Bay Bleu, a beautiful classic expression of blue cheese from Point Reyes out on the coast in Western Marin.
And blue cheese is notably a difficult cheese to pair wine with, precisely for what you just talked about with regards to it's that heavy coating, funky, fat, aromatic.
Does really well with cab, though. Does really well with cab because it is big and covers your palate. So
yes. So that was a tray that Chef Spencer produced, which I think the technical critique for that is it did not stink. It was absolutely spectacular. And now, George, I want to get to the wine portion, because let's say we're going to do 4 wines, and we've got 2 or 3 years between each vintage. You talked a little bit about the attributes of hillside fruit. What is happening as you get into older wines from a aromas, flavors, pairing perspective versus, a 2020 versus a 2010?
Well, generally speaking, your fruits fall off as the wines get older, and you get a little bit different taste profile of what it was when it was a young wine, considerably different taste profile. And to me, a tasting of a wine is kind of a bell-shaped curve with rough edges around it, because it's not a total linear thing. And plus, everybody enjoys those wines at different spots on that curve. Somebody might like it as a younger wine, somebody as a medium-aged wine, and somebody as an older-aged wine. It depends on your palate. We all have different palates. I'm sure Spencer tastes things that Martin and I would probably never taste in foods, just because he's been trained to taste it. So the wines are a lot the same way. People that I think a little bit, the more you drink, the more you taste, to a point. But I think the older wines, like you say, you notice the acids more, you notice the tannins more, but the fruits seem to disappear somewhat as they get older. But again, they need to be balanced in the beginning, and the balance will stay with them longer that way. When somebody tells you the wine's going to taste good in 15 or 20 years, if it doesn't taste good in the beginning, I'm not sure it's going to taste good in the end.
Well, and yeah, I agree with you there. If it's not good in 2020, it's 2030 is not going to make it any better.
Yeah,
It's it's funny. I go round and round with people on decanting old wines, and I'm curious what your philosophy is. Like the '05 this evening, it's 18 years
Yeah.
of age. We're 10 years down the road from when the last time we formally tasted. I'll look at my notes from that time we tasted.
I
What is
I
your
don't know if you
philosophy?
can notice here, I've got a little glass cover here. And to me, I don't like to decant older wines. I'd rather decant a younger wine. Air does a lot for a wine. It can destroy it or it can open it up. So there's this kind of sweet spot in the middle where you get some air in, but it's not to the point of oxidizing. So I think I would not, well, I would not decant the 2005. You know,
I
I
like
think
that.
on my wines, if I'm doing any decanting, and maybe do the 2012 or newer. I don't think I'd do any of the pre 2000 and maybe the 2011 you could decant, but from the 2010 down. And I guess if you've got a vertical, you don't have to be in a hurry to drink a wine. So you can taste a little one, a little the other, and you can see as the air opens them up when you like them. And generally speaking, people, I like the 12. Then all of a sudden there's geez, that 5's pretty good. So and it depends what they're eating with it too.
Well, and that's where I was going to go with chef, and with that in mind, because George, you just brought up a great point as it relates to go back and revisit something. Historically, if you're going to have, let's just say you have 4 vintages, actually maybe let's say 3 vintages, you have to pick one way or the other. You're going to start with the oldest first or the youngest first. I generally subscribe to starting with the youngest first. So I would go, let's say we have a 20, a 19, and an 18. Start with the 20. I think the 18 and 17 should be opened in advance. They're young enough now that a little air will do them some good. And then, but chef, to your point with regards to having different weighted apps with regards to the different wines, having those wines open for 30, 45 minutes or an hour, and then coming back and trying different foods with them now after they've been opened. How do you plan a menu around that? Because the two are going to be 180 degrees different.
I think you'd have to be working with the sommelier and doing the dance with them and coordinating to kind of mitigate for that to happen in a way. That's honestly something I've never even thought about. I've never dealt with. But yeah, I mean, it does the flavor of the wine change so dramatically that it will completely mess up the pairing that you've made. I like I said, I've never even contemplated it, but I don't know.
I'd be curious what sipsters think in the chat. I bet you the flavor of the wine over the course of an hour on an older wine could certainly change so dramatically that maybe upon opening, the lighter lettuce, in our 3 examples earlier, was better, but now an hour later, that lettuce gets killed by this wine, or vice versa. I think it can change that dramatically for some of these well-made wines.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting. I think we're going to have to try it, George.
We might have to try it.
but I guess we don't want to overcomplicate life either. I mean, I think Spencer's point is right that I know we all strive to be 100% of the time, but some wines at 95% and some foods at 95%, it still might be the best meal you've ever had. So
especially the third wine or the 4th wine.
And that's one of the reasons I kind of cut it back to 3 wines is that, we weren't always making as much rational decision if there was just 3 of us drinking 4 bottles of wine.
I don't know what's on this cracker, but this wine is amazing. You're eating the napkin. I am sorry. All right, I like that. I'm going to launch a poll here and see if I'm going to try to launch a poll. Let's see what happens here because Zoom changed a couple things. All right, how many bottles is ideal for vertical tasting? Because we've been all over the board on this one.
I guess it depends on the size of your group.
Hold on, you can't answer the poll yet.
Well, I'm sorry. I didn't know if I wasn't even reading the question.
Is there a challenge with the ability to vote? Oh, there we go. The number of bottles were ideal for vertical tasting: 2, 3, 4, or 5. So we've got no teetotalers and no raging alcoholics because item 2 and 5 have not been selected. So currently none of my family's on. Someone might have just joined. All right. Now I wonder if I have to see they did this. Oh, okay. So they're answering both at the same time. See, Zoom changed this on me. Which 2 poll questions in 1 attempt? So which part of winemaking gives red wines their color? Brent, that's actually a WSET level 2 exam question. So the answers are fermentation in contact with stems and seeds, pressing juice from the grapes, fermentation in contact with grape skins, fermentation in oak barrels. So my guess is the color does in fact come from fermentation because 3 of the 4 answers had that process in it. So we're going to let you answer question 1 in your own way. 3 or 4 seems to be the perfect amount for a vertical tasting as far as number of bottles is concerned. And the answer for which part of the winemaking process gives red wines their color, Sipsters, you're nailing it this evening. Fermentation in contact with grape skins absolutely is the correct answer.
Yes, I got it right too.
So I will share the results with you. So 3 seems to be the consensus for number of bottles to open, and you can see how well everybody did. Honor system, Hans, did you have pressing juice from grapes? Just joking. All right, so fermentation, obviously contact with the grape skins is how it does get its color. Mission Control is going to launch what I was trying to launch earlier and show one of the challenges, one of Chef's biggest nightmares. When he walks into a home and hosting a dinner, private dinner, you'll see it. Just show them all. Roll tape. Never said that before. It does give you a lot of power. Nothing's happening.
There's Mission Control.
There's Mission Control. All right. So, by the way, you can zoom. See, it kind of gets, there we go. It gets funky. All right. So there's what we started with. Here's the menu.
There's the menu.
It was amazing.
Was.
There's the, everyone went home with one of those. Now
that was the salmon with the salsa cruda. Yeah.
All right. And what type of some microgreens on there?
Yeah. So we have a great microgreen farm in Bodega towards the coast, and he just puts together amazing mixes of microgreens that he harvests every 2 weeks. So yeah.
And is this the one? I see a bunch of tomatoes on there. So this was the dish.
This was the salmon with salsa cruda. Yeah, that was a very acidic, garlic forward salsa on top of the salmon.
Okay.
That was porchetta, the slow roasted porchetta with the salsa verde.
Yeah, that was insane. I can smell that from here with our new upgrade on Zoom, the smell-o-vision.
There's
the sliders coming out. No, there's one more.
Yeah.
No, there's 2 more.
Lava cake.
So
Yes.
zoom in on this. This is a chef's worst nightmare, and I don't want chef to tell yet, but anybody in the chat know what is the problem or challenge here? Yeah, I mean, all of our glasses and elbows are on the table, and we'd probably be getting yelled at if we were in some manners class. But you have to keep this in mind when you're entertaining. And yes, Jim B is correct. There is no wine on the table. That's actually accurate, because look at, this is chef has done meals at this house both before we were there a year ago and or a year and a half ago, and since. He's done, I don't know, a dozen plus meals at this house.
About, yeah.
This table is the narrowest dining table that he has to work with. And so when you are entertaining, and you are, especially for the holidays, everyone wants to put sleighs and candelabras and things on that nature. There are no wine glasses right now on the table.
Big
And if you're
pumpkins
doing
in the fall.
Yeah, and pumpkins in the fall and gourds and that sort of stuff. Keep that in mind when you're doing a vertical tasting, because if you do it correctly, you should have a glass for each bottle. So the person's going to have 3 or 4 glasses, and now there is no room on this table for 3 or 4 glasses. What else, chef, should people think about when they are designing their semi-formal table for the holidays, and they're going to do a vertical tasting?
Well, like you said, obviously leaving as much space for what you're going to put on the table as possible. I mean, I think a great way to start is to dress your table how you want it to be seen, and then before you do food, then you have to clear it off, because that's what everyone's sitting down for is a meal. Candles should have no scent. That's pretty vital. I think a great way to keep the design on the table when everyone's sitting is you can have a charger or a placemat under that has maybe some nice color, and then on top of that you have nice plates, or you can be cognizant of your napkin color, things like that can really just express whatever holiday you're celebrating. But really the main thing is you have to take into account this. If you're serving family style, you're going to put big platters on the table. My word of advice is, if you have over 8 people, try to double up and mirror your table almost, where you can have so you're not passing things over between all 8 people, maybe, and that allows you to have smaller plates that everyone can share. 4 or 5 people can share on each side of the table. That's what I try to do, because people want to be able to sit and eat and maybe not even pass. You just pick off from where you're sitting, instead of having to worry about a 10 serving piece of beef and carrying that big platter around. You can always set up a buffet, but it's nice to have all the food you're eating out on the table. I mean, it creates warmth, and it's just another part of a great meal.
I like it. I do want to go ahead, George.
I was just going to say, I like the idea of having something with a white background on it, so I can look at the wine and just see how it's aging and so forth. So as a wine guy, I guess it's nice to have something white that I don't care if it's a napkin, a menu, something, a placemat or a plate. It's nice to have something white, so when you look at your wine, you've got a nice background that can really check the color out on it.
No, that's an awesome idea, and it doesn't have to be an 8 and 11 size paper from the printer or anything like that, because that's going to take too much space. You can use a 5x7 note card, and on one side of it, you can potentially have the person's place setting name and number, stuff like that, and then you can flip it over and use that for the wine assessment portion. That's a great idea.
Even a napkin, a white napkin would work. But it's nice to have that white background so you can look at the color of the wine.
Okay, I'm gonna do a quick in vertical tasting. Wouldn't you want to have the same food and see how it changes with the different vintages? I'll ask that question to Chef and George. Would you want to have the same food with each vintage? Chef first.
You could, depending on the food, but you're really you'll see how the wine plays 1,000% you'll see how the wine plays with say, the easiest pairing would be prime rib or just a plain cut of a non-soft cut of beef, or maybe you're just adding salt and black pepper and doing a roast on it. I think it would allow you to see the differences in the wine more than the difference in the food. You're almost treating the food as your blank slate, and then trying to assess the differences in each vintage.
George, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess as a wine guy here, I like to have, which we didn't have, where we could have 4 glasses out there, so we could try the light things with the different varieties we've got of wines, and so it's nice to have. And at my wine tastings, I always have enough glassware where I can literally pour 3 or 4 vintages to each participant. So as we go through the different courses, they've got those 3 or 4 wines to taste against each food item.
Well, and I think
and some of the times, 1 year wine will really stand out with one food item. Oh, you've got the
your internet's a tad slow, but I know what you're saying, because then you have you've got the wine.
I got a picture of the world here.
I know it's coming up. I do like that idea, Dahlia, because, and George brings up a good point. This is why it's so important to have enough stemware, because you could have a 12, 13, and 14 in your glass, and you may want to go around with the 12 and try little pieces of food with the 12, but then you want to put that down and grab the 13 and then go grab some of the pieces of food with the 13. So you do need to have enough stemware. And I do want to show folks, for those of you that have been with us long enough, wine region for us is Napa and Sonoma. And I think Mission Control is going to put the name of that house that we rented in the link into the chat. But that house is right up here in Calistoga, or north of Calistoga in Knights Valley. But where George earned his chops and became more famous after he left Rockford, Illinois, was this small hill called Pritchard. And
right across from Pritchard Hill, right?
Yeah,
I'm kind of right behind the Cellar Angel.
But this is some pretty famous landscape up here. I mean, you've got Bryant family just back over here. You've got David Arthur right up here. His brother Bob Long's estate is right here. And if you get a chance, I actually think this may have just sold. But there's some pretty hallowed grounds up here for sourcing fruit. And the fruit that you're drinking this evening in the 05 is, correct me, George, a lot of this is Pritchard Hill hillside.
Correct. Greg Melanson has a little vineyard there. It doesn't quite show. It's been so long since I've looked at it for the air. I'm not sure which little parcel it is, but he makes pretty nice wine and had some extra grapes. So I bought from him for 4 years till my vineyard came online.
Yeah, it's incredible. Spencer, you said no overt fragrances on the table. So
no. I want to smell the food.
Yes. Sorry, Yankee Candle Company.
Or wine.
It's same thing when you go taste wine. No heavy perfumes and colognes. No, you don't want any of those aromas blocking the food or the wine. And we do have to talk about cork extraction, George, on older wines. So I think this is an invaluable tool.
It looks, yes. And this, I don't know if you can see it here. This is my 2005 cork, which
hold it up higher. There you go.
And the only mark on it's where I scraped it with the osso. But yet when you take a wine screw, some of the time you'll pull the top off on older wines. So use the osso on anything over about 10 years old. I think,
and
that's my recommendation.
there's a bunch of videos online on how to use these. There's a little bit of a trick to them. I guess you should practice maybe on a newer wine. But they're $8-9 max to get one of these, but they will definitely save your older wine cork and save you from having cork disintegrate in your hands and then into the wine, which I've done before.
Yeah. Then you've got to try to filter it out and so forth. And generally, when you look at a cork, when you look at the bottom of this cork, you can see there's been no leakage. That's
right.
That's when you get scared, is if you start to see there's been a leakage. And you can see on this cork that it didn't even, hasn't even started up the cork. But yeah, when you see a cork that you see it's turning red on the outside, you might have a problem.
And Chef, I'm wondering, for anybody that is, say, a rookie in the food and wine pairing, maybe they have to impress in-laws or something like that, and they're a little bit nervous. They're the ones doing the holiday table. Are there any fail-safe, can't miss, go-to pairings that you say you can take this to the bank?
I mean, a classic, like I said, a classic prime rib is a great vehicle to express a cab. It can be a hands-off. There's so much information out there on how to cook if you're a novice. I can recommend Serious Eats. The website is an amazing starter point for people who want to get into food and want to understand what they're cooking and how cooking works. There's a technique called the reverse sear, where you essentially put the prime rib in the oven at 225 degrees with a probe in it for as many hours as it will take to cook that piece. And you just let it sit there, and then you blast the heat right before you serve it. It's very hands off. It's a showstopper of a protein, because it's big and you carve into it, and people who want more well done pieces can take the ends, and people who want less well done pieces can take the middle. And it's a fail safe, especially for Christmas, in terms of pairing for Thanksgiving with your turkey. I mean, I love champagne and turkey. So.
No, exactly. And then if your prime rib is too rare, you can just have Hans hit it with the blowtorch.
Absolutely.
He just walks around the house with that, so it's fantastic. George, any of your wines surprising you right now that you think, yeah, you need to drink this one if you have it, because it is on the taper side of that bell curve?
I noticed a little variation in 2004, but to me, it's kind of like an older Tuscan wine almost. It tastes like a really old Sangiovese. I think actually you and Denise just had one not too long ago.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the Italian association, because it has that caramel, maroon type of color now, and a lot of the fruit has fallen off.
Almost a little mushroomy, kind of, but I mean, like I said, I'm pretty happy with most of my wines the way they're aging, because I've got wines that are almost 25 years old that are still drinking very. I'm not ashamed to go out to dinner with them.
No, that's outstanding. Chef, I can't thank you enough for taking time. Chef, by the way, is going to be catching a red eye later this evening and flying from California to New York to go see some family. And links to how to taste with Chef and how to actually get some wine from George have been placed in the chat by Mission Control. It is going to be Thanksgiving on Thursday. I don't know how that happened. It was just August. And so now it's just so darn fast. I can't believe it. But we will be off next Friday, and hopefully we will be doing a horizontal tasting because of the tryptophan and just sitting on the couch and watching a parade. But we will be back in 2 weeks with one of our favorites, who also happens to be an aged Cabernet expert, Ignacio Delgadillo of Delgadillo Cellars. So all of you, wishing you a wonderful, wonderful holiday. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you learned a few things on what to do and what not to do with vertical tastings and food pairings. And as always, we cannot thank you enough for your support. We're humbled by it. Karen Athanas, I saw you. Not supposed to say your last name, so sorry about that. But thank you all for the support. We don't deserve it, but we're going to take it. Be good to one another. Thanks so much and have an awesome, awesome holiday. Cheers, all.
Thank you,
Happy
everyone.
Thanksgiving.